Hey guys, Zen from Moms Across America here with huge news. We sent off 43 samples from school lunches, moms and dads and students from all across the country, and we tested them for glyphosate, 220 pesticides, 108 different veterinary drugs and hormones, a whole slew of heavy metals and nutrients. And guess what, folks? Our school lunches are toxic. The government is allowing the poisoning of our children at schools. The levels were crazy. 95% of the school lunches were positive for glyphosate. 74% of them were positive for some other type of harmful pesticide. There were like 29 different harmful pesticides in the food. There were high levels of hormones, and the heavy metals were off the charts. 100% of them had high levels of heavy metals. Some of them about 6,900 times higher than what the EPA allows in water. So check out the results on momsacrossamerica.org and share it with your friends. This is Zen Honeycutt of Moms Across America. We are a nationwide nonprofit, a national coalition of unstoppable moms, and our moms and dads and students got together and sent 43 samples of school lunches to a lab in Fairfield, Iowa called Health Research Institute and tested them. We got them tested not just for glyphosate, but for 220 of the most egregious pesticides that are being used today. Also for heavy metals, the top four most highly used or present heavy metals, for over 108 of the veterinary drugs and hormones that are used in livestock, and also for a dozen or so of nutrients. And the results were horrifying, folks. The results were way worse than what is being served to the American public in our grocery stores and far above what we imagine. So first of all, 95.3% of the school lunch samples, of the 43 school lunch samples, were positive for glyphosate and AMPA. And AMPA is the breakdown of glyphosate and is far more toxic than glyphosate. 95%. When you look at the testing done by the Detox Project recently, it was around 60% of the samples tested from the grocery store were positive for glyphosate. And in Canada, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, when they tested, the samples were also about 60%. So these school lunches are far more toxic than what is being served to the general American public. Also, 100% of the wheat samples, any products that had wheat in them, like the burger buns or the tortillas, crackers, pretzels, all of that, 100% of those samples were positive for glyphosate. And as far as the harmful pesticides goes, and these pesticides, some of them, cause tumors and cancer and reproductive issues, birth defects, all of that. 74% of the school lunch samples were positive for harmful pesticides. Some of them, 6, 7, maybe 9 of them were positive. The lunches and things like that were positive. An example, so you can see what the test results look like. I'll just walk you through it. So here is, for instance, a banana with multiple pesticides. When it says trace, that means it was still present, right? You can see probably a dozen pesticides here in that banana. And you can see, some of the pesticides did not show up at all, but these are 29 of the ones that did show up. And the vegetables and the fruits look like they have some of the higher levels, more of different types of pesticides. Some of the highest levels were in things like, here's a mozzarella breadstick. The wheat was very high. Here's one that's 427. Oh, that's an apple. Excuse me. That's an apple, 427 parts per billion. Some of the wheat ones had very high levels, and there's all different kinds of 29 different kinds of harmful pesticides. Here's 176. That's again in a green apple. So folks, we've got to be aware that having fruits and vegetables in our school lunches is a good idea, but only if they're organic. If they're not organic, we are introducing more toxic chemicals and pesticides to our children than if they didn't eat fruits and vegetables. And this is something that I said years ago, back when Michelle Obama was getting fruits and vegetables into the food supply. I spoke up at a conference with a bunch of moms. I was not very popular. They were pretty unhappy with me. But I said, it really doesn't do any good unless we're giving them organic fruits and vegetables, because otherwise we're introducing more toxic chemicals into their system. And that's exactly what this testing shows. I'm sorry, but it has to be organic if we're going to be giving fruits and vegetables to our kids, if you want to avoid these toxic chemicals. Okay, so then next we have the levels of the heavy metals in the school lunches were, okay, I never expected this. 100% of the samples had high levels of heavy metals. Now, when you look at the numbers, it doesn't look like they're high. Okay. Some of them are 2 or 7 or 5. You can see in this column right here, that's showing up here, 4, 16, 2, 4, 1, 9, 3. It doesn't look that high, but there are some that are 17, 21, 19. It goes all the way up to 94. But when you look at the levels in comparison to what the EPA allows, what the EPA allows in water of heavy metals is far lower than what is being given to our children in their food right now. Okay. In fact, thousands of times lower. The EPA's allowable level of lead in water is 0.015. And what's showing up in our food supply, in the school lunch supply, is 94. You can see what the EPA allows: 0.01 of arsenic, 0.005 of cadmium, 0.015 of lead, and 0.002 of mercury. And then, as I showed you earlier, what's showing up to 1994 times. So when you divide the levels of 0.015 of lead into the 94.4, which is showing up in our school lunches, that's 6,923 times higher than what the EPA's maximum levels are allowed in drinking water. It is very high, very concerning, because we all know that heavy metals have shown to have harmful consequences for children's health, including mental retardation, neurocognitive disorders, behavioral disorders, respiratory problems, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. Definitely not something we should be feeding the future leaders of our country. I think you would probably all agree. We've had all kinds of veterinary drugs and hormones that are showing up in the school lunches. There's, I believe this is 4 of them that are showed up in 9 different school lunches, some of them as high as 130 parts per billion. This is a tetragenic, meaning it causes birth defects, and embryonic toxicity, meaning it can cause miscarriages. Okay. And so very, very important that we clean up the food supply. These are mostly antifungals, antiparasitics, antibiotics being found in our school lunches. These are at high levels. And these are being found there because most of the animals and livestock are raised in confined animal feeding operations, like 3,000 pigs in a small space, or chickens or beef. And it's such unsanitary conditions that the farmers give them antibiotics to prevent them from being sick so that they can still sell them. So they're selling basically sick animals and pumped up with drugs, and our kids are eating them. When I see these veterinary drugs and hormones that are at high levels in the school lunches, it makes me think of a dear friend of mine who is a school counselor at a high school. And she told me in confidence, but I'm not going to name any names. She's like, Zen, these kids are messed up. Their emotional state is just, she's like, I've never seen anything like it. This is out of control. And this was a couple of years ago. She told me this. But she said, we have, teenage girls. She said one teenage girl told her when she was crying and hormonal and upset that she got in the shower that morning, and while she was in the shower, breast milk started coming out of her breasts. Okay, this is a teenage girl just suddenly lactating. Okay, that has to be because of the hormones in the food that she's eating that cause cows to lactate more. I can't imagine why a 15-year-old, why that would happen to her. She wasn't pregnant. She just was lactating all of a sudden. I mean, these hormones and veterinary drugs are messing with our kids' reproductive issues, with their emotional state, with their mood, with their behavior, with their ability to learn. And we can't imagine a child to be able to sit in class and learn when she's in a hormonal mess, So there's a lot going on with our teenagers right now and with our young people. And we have to ask ourselves, is it really just that they have behavioral issues, or that there's bad parenting, or that we don't have enough restrictions or laws, controlling what they do? Maybe they're being exposed to endocrine disrupting hormone drugs and chemicals and heavy metals that are no neurotoxins. And maybe our kids are victims of this toxic system. Maybe a lot of this, sexual identity and transgenderism and birth defects that are happening and mental health issues and lack of sleeplessness and learning disorders and all that, maybe a lot of that could be connected back to these endocrine disrupting chemicals and heavy metals and toxins and pesticides in the food supply. Maybe. Okay. So I think we need to have some compassion for these kids and take a look at what's going on and how they're being poisoned. And we need to take action.